Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Mark Delora. I'm on the board of Games for Change, and I worked for the Obama administration back in 2013, 2014, doing games for education and citizen science and healthcare and all the good things. And I'm excited about this panel today, and so I'm going to talk as quickly and shortly as possible and turn it over to them. So we've got a series of 4 10-minute long presentations, so presentations plus questions, and then at the end we'll have 10 minutes afterward for group Q&A. So we're going to move fast, but we'll have time at the end of each presentation for you to ask questions dedicated to each group. So quickly running down the list of the people who are here, we've got Peter Stidwell, who's exec producer at Fablevision Studios. Maybe you want to go like this. And Shannon Meneses, who's exec producer at the Learning Games Network. So they're going to talk about, this is a really interesting topic, they're going to talk about 6 years for their game Quandary and what it's been like having that game out in the field for that long and keeping it fresh and relevant and alive. After that, we've got Brian Alsbach, who's exec vice president at Eline Media. He'll be talking about the fundamental equation of games in the classroom, which is an interesting topic. After Brian, we've got Lynette Attai, who's president of Playwell LLC. That's a global compliance consulting firm, and she's going to talk about personalization and privacy, innovating in the age of compliance, which is getting, I'm expecting you're getting busier and busier and busier. After that, we've got Emma Kofor. So Clara is out sick, I'm sad to say. We've got Emma here. Emma's going to talk about designing for inclusive play, how to build games for everyone. She's from the Google Platforms and Ecosystems team and is lead brand strategist. So, super packed, super fast. And I'm going to get off here and turn it over to Peter and Shannon.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here talking about Quandary. As Mark mentioned, 7 years ago, Quandary won the Games for Change Game of the Year. And since then, this free, nonprofit, social impact game developed by Learning Games Network and Fablevision has been played over 1.7 million times. Our target audience is middle schoolers who play the game either on their own, with family, friends, and in classrooms. In Quandary, you're captain of a space colony where you are tasked with resolving tricky ethical dilemmas in which there is no one clear right answer. You investigate and help find solutions by talking to colony members, separating facts from opinions, and identifying the pros and cons of various solutions. As Mark said, I'm here with Peter from Fablevision, our long-term development partner for the game, and we're going to share with you what we've learned about maximizing impact, keeping Quandary relevant, growing, and sustainable.
We're going to share 4 key principles. The first is to start with a strong foundation. We began by designing Quandary with a strong subject matter that is essential for our chosen audience. Now more than ever, kids need help identifying and preparing themselves to deal with complicated ethical issues in their own lives. And we chose middle schoolers as our audience, as they are at a very formative time in their lives. We knew they'd be constantly reshaping themselves at this moment in their lives when they're playing this game. We then chose to explore fundamental, evergreen skills through the gameplay. Skills such as critical thinking, perspective taking, ethical thinking, and decision making. On the technical side, we developed a strong design that was modular, and that allowed for expansion of the game over time. So for instance, a couple of years ago, we were quite easily able to develop a new episode, and this one was about cyberbullying, and that joins the original 3 episodes. Our second key principle is to keep rethinking and reshaping. Listening to feedback from teachers and students has really shaped how we've grown the game over time. So for instance, we've expanded the educator resources that surround the game to help teachers implement the game in the classroom in a variety of flexible ways. And this included the creation of an expanded curriculum guide that links the game to a range of different subject areas from the fundamental principles that the game addresses, and that includes science and geography. And so, for example, one of the storylines explores conservation of water, and another storyline explores invasive species. So we were able to make those links. We also added a character creator to the game that allows players to write, share, and receive feedback on their own content within the game. And this works particularly well in classroom situations where all students are able to contribute to creating game content that they then play together and discuss together in a customized version of the game. We also added classroom features for teachers based on their requests. So this includes student and class account management, a dashboard that allows the teachers to view student progress and play patterns over time. And we also added a streamlined website with all the information that the teachers need and parents need as well. And most recently, we just launched a mobile phone version of the game, which required a redesign of the interface.
And our third principle is to nurture a great network of partners. It's essential to find like-minded partners and distributors that share our mission. We keep them in the loop as committed stakeholders, and they provided us with fantastic guidance over the years. For instance, we are a BrainPop Game Up partner with Quandary playable via their website, and we team up together to provide additional marketing and educator materials for the game. Our development partner, Fablevision, also provides additional marketing and outreach via their channels. We've also been honored to have partnered with the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics at MIT, where together we've run transformative teaching workshops for educators in Mexico, India, and the States. In these workshops, Quandary is introduced as one of the tools educators can use to have their students explore ethics in detail. Our research partner, Tufts University, has also run several studies on the game. They provide feedback on the game development and expansion. And they've also developed a comprehensive educational curriculum that is currently in nationwide testing. We've also identified educators who can be the equivalent of brand ambassadors for the game. Their time and dedication to Quandary is vital, so it is our priority to continue to make them feel valued, informed, and connected. Our network of educators and all of our partners have fed into all of our development decisions, most recently helping craft the topics and content for our newest episode. And without these key relationships, Quandary wouldn't be what it is today. And our fourth and final principle is to always be looking ahead. We continue to grow the game and our network. Right now, we're looking to create a fifth episode. And we're also looking at how the game can be used beyond the core audience of middle schoolers. For instance, we've done some preliminary work at the university level, and we're looking to possibly expand Quandary to business schools and workplace training. And in the spirit of Quandary's tagline, at the dawn of this new game-based learning era, how will you take your game to the next level? We hope this presentation gave you some ideas.
So I believe we're going to take some questions and answers. We just got a couple of minutes, so happy to take those now. Yes, Mark.
What mechanism did you find most effective in engaging educators and having their feedback?
So we've used a variety of different ways to get educator feedback. One thing is just to have kind of, we have a social media presence where we're putting things out, and educators are sometimes tweeting back to us. There's a lot of email that comes in as well. So we're making sure that we're kind of going through all of that and making sure that we're noting anything that we want to change for a priority list for the future, but also key to some of the things that we've done as well, just to reach out to those teachers and ask them questions about the ways that they're using the game. And we ran a little contest at one point to see how teachers were using the game in their classrooms, and there were so many creative ways, and that's kind of how the character creator got born, as a way of sort of facilitating some of that stuff. And then after that, we've actually invited teachers to be advocates to talk at conferences around the country as well.
Can you tell us a bit about sustainability from a business model perspective? Are you largely grant supported? Are educational institutions funding? What the revenue streams are? It's very impressive to keep a game going for so many years, and I think it would be something that would be really helpful to the community to learn more about.
Sure. So, great question. Thank you. So it is one of the challenges with keeping a game sustainable and relevant and out there. But one thing that we are lucky, we're a nonprofit, and we have philanthropic funding, and we have Shelley London is she is one of the founders of the game, and she spearheaded the idea of what became Quandary, and she also helped us spearhead the fundraising piece. And we continue to find new and creative ways to do it. It's not a simple solution. I wish there were a simple answer, but we are continuing as we reach out and try to go to different audiences, not only using corporate as an audience, but also possible fundraising. So kind of marrying the two a little bit. So.
I guess at the back. Right on the end. Do you want to just wait for the microphone?
I want to know, design-wise, how did the seat time or duration of maybe the classroom setting or maybe playing at home influenced some of the choices on how long a student should be playing this?
Yeah, so we knew from the start that one of the main use cases for this was going to be in classrooms. So we wanted to make sure that it was going to fit into that time. And so we designed it to be playable within about 30 minutes on average. And we do find that some folks take a longer time to go through it, and some folks take a shorter time. But one of the key things when you're designing a game like this is to ensure that there's some degree of replayability, and also to account for the fact that some folks will just go through, some kids will go through and be quite quick because they're sort of trying to get through it. Obviously, we're doing a whole load of things to engage them and make them think along the way. But through the scoring mechanism and the outcome that you see at the end of each of the episodes, if you do go quickly, then you're likely not to get as high a score, as a good outcome as you might do. So we found that in those cases, the kids will actually, want to then play it again and see whether they can improve upon what they've done, which is, of course, one of the whole points of games.
Okay, I've got the mic.
Oh, sure.
The question is, what have you done to generalize the learning that you get from the game? In other words, creating or getting the learning into authentic, real-world situations.
Yeah, so actually it was an interesting feedback that we got from some folks, teachers, when we were first showing this, about the fact that we set this in a fantastical environment, but it absolutely links to and is relevant to kids' lives. So we've chosen themes such as cliques, and there's a question about kind of uniforms in the game as well. There's different themes that really, that even though you're on a fantastical environment, there are things that they can relate to. And we like that combination. Scott Osterwald is the game designer behind this, who's also the game designer behind Zumbinis and a couple of other famous and important learning games. And the idea is to somewhat put the player into a fantastical environment so that they're not kind of hamstrung by the kinds of things they normally talk about, and we're going over, but also to allow the kids to sort of have conversations with each other in the classroom and outside the classroom as well if they're playing at home, in order to kind of bring the learning back to real life. And that's something we very much encourage through the curriculum guides that we have alongside the game. All right, I think we are over time, so sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Morning, everybody. So the title of this talk is The Fundamental Equation of Games in the Classroom. I guess just to sort of gauge the audience a little bit, how many folks, by a show of hands, are in the process of making a game that they intend for classroom use right now? Okay. How many folks are already have a game out in classrooms? Okay, excellent. And how many folks are like thinking about making a game for classrooms, but you're not quite sure where to go yet? Okay, great. A few folks do. Excellent. So well, then you're in the right place, all of you. So the context of this talk is if you have the goal of having your game achieve broad classroom adoption because you're interested in the educational impact, you want the project to be financially sustainable, or perhaps you're even doing it in a for-profit context, what should you be thinking about? And if I could reduce that based on my experience at Eline Media to sort of one point I would love for you to take away, it's what I'll talk about today. And I think it's best expressed in this equation, which I call the fundamental equation of games in the classroom. That equation is EV over the F of A is greater than or equal to approximately 10. I hope that was clear. Thank you. So really what this equation is about is it's about adoption friction. And what the equation says is for your game to achieve that kind of broad classroom use, the educational value of your experience, the ratio of that to the friction associated with someone adopting that experience in a classroom for real, that ratio has to be greater than or equal to approximately 10. To state that in ordinary English, a way to think about that is for every unit of difficulty it takes to adopt your game in the classroom, the game should deliver at least 10 units of educational value. Another way to think about that, and I think a way that makes a bit more clear, is in terms of time. So the translation of the translation is, for every minute a teacher has to spend preparing to use your game in the classroom, it should replace at least 10 minutes of instructional time. And when I say prepare, I mean everything soup to nuts. That includes discovering that your game exists, thinking about how they would integrate it into their classroom. Is it a fit? Going through the purchasing process or approval process to get it approved and installed in classrooms. And then actually creating the lesson plans and preparing to use it in a concrete way. To make that very concrete, if you have a game that would take an hour of classroom experience, and a teacher could use that game for an hour in each of 5 different sections of the same course, then all of that can't add up to more than half an hour of time for the teacher to deliver on that 10-to-1 ratio. Many classroom games do not optimize this equation well. There are, and it leads to what you see in the picture. The most common poor way to solve this equation by far is to have a low educational value relative to adoption friction. So, for example, if the learning objectives covered by the game don't ordinarily receive a ton of classroom time, it's very unlikely that a teacher will devote more time than what they ordinarily would to a game that addresses those same objectives. Your game has to slot into what else teachers do in their classroom and what they have to cover, and your game can't take 20 times as much time as it would to cover those same learning objectives without using your game. Similarly, no matter how good your game is, no matter how well designed, no matter how great it is at addressing learning objectives, if the adoption requires lots of friction against narrow learning objectives, it's very likely teachers will not want to pay the cost of that adoption friction when they get down to it, and so they'll stick with what they already do instead of using your game. I'll talk about 2 viable approaches, I think, and there are several, but I'll just highlight 2 that do satisfy this equation. One is to be incredibly focused. Having highly focused learning objectives in a game that replaces a comparably small amount of classroom time. The redistricting game, which is a game from the Annenberg Center and the USC Game Innovation Lab, is a great example of this. It's a game about gerrymandering. It would take 1, maybe 2 classroom periods to play, which is approximately the amount of time that would be devoted to objectives around gerrymandering, redistricting in a high school civics class, right? So it's a really solid fit there. It's really intuitive and easy to use. It's web-based. It is, and if you're going this route, your game is probably free. And the biggest challenge for a game like this is discoverability. How are teachers going to learn that it exists? But there are solutions out of there. Game Up from BrainPop was mentioned in the prior talk, which is a platform that hosts tons and tons of games of varying lengths of experience, but including relatively short focused games like this. A platform like iCivics, which is an issue or topic area specific portal, hosts many games that are around the topic of civics, and they're in places, some place like iCivics, some place like the Annenberg Institute. Those are places that teachers naturally would go to looking for content in the respective curricular areas, so it's a natural fit. So this sort of be focused is one approach. A second approach at the opposite end of the spectrum is to be a platform, right? So the theory here being that the friction of adoption is offset by the breadth and depth of content. I think the clearest and best example of this, and one we're probably all familiar with in education, is Minecraft, all the various incarnations of Minecraft in education, from the original game to Minecraft EDU and now to the Education Edition at Microsoft, right? There are a ton of different things you can do with Minecraft, and so the tax that's paid to acquire it, install it, onboard students with it is offset by once you pay that tax once, there's a ton you can do with it. If you go this route, it's much more likely that you can be installable. Again, being web-based helps because now people will pay the tax of the work it takes to get that installed. I think if you're going this route, you could be free or paid. And in terms of distribution, it certainly helps to start with the most successful commercial game on the planet, like Minecraft, but not all of us can do that. But still, I think there are ways, and you heard about some of them in the prior talk as well, that smaller projects can quilt together distribution strategies that will get into teachers. Our game, GameStar Mechanic, I think is an example of a title where we did that. We're in tens of thousands of classrooms with that game now. I would be happy to talk more about that during the question period. So just to sum up a little bit, I think these are some of the attributes of solutions that, that solve the equation well address. Teacher-focused discoverability, so teachers can actually find you and either adopt you themselves or advocate. Being web-based cross-platform, having low hardware requirements. Free or low cost and especially transparent pricing, so it's very clear to teachers if you're charging for it, and to the people, the higher ups in the food chain who have to approve that, how it's going to work, right? A school-friendly purchasing process. You can't just put your game up on the web if you're charging for it and expect people to swipe credit cards. You got to be in the zone of we're going to handle purchase orders and fill out the 20 pages of paperwork to get on the district's approved vendor list. Clear alignment with curricular standards down to the texts, to the extent that you're saying, hey, in this popular middle school civics textbook, when you get to chapter 7, lesson 3, that's where you use our game, right? Just slots right in there. Compliance with educational privacy and accessibility standards. If you don't, in an increasing number of schools and districts, irrespective of it just being a best practice, you won't have a shot of getting in the door. And then materials that help teachers onboard specifically, getting started guides, sample lesson plans, the assessment tools they can use, teacher features built into your game. And I think if you think about some of these things and bake them into your solutions for those of you who are still in the process of designing them, I think that's one successful way to balance the fundamental equation. Thank you. Time for a question or two in the back there in the cap.
Yes, I love all of this. I wish to take a copy of this presentation, so there's a lot to learn here. My big question is about the focused aspect of making like a relatively small game on a lesson. Now, I believe in like the perfect future educational world, there would be an educational video game for every chapter of a textbook. Now, would you say a game per chapter is too broad, too focused, or just right?
I think it's a question of balancing the equation. So I think that, I mean, there certainly is a natural scope from a design perspective of educational experiences that you have to hit. And I don't mean to suggest that being well designed and properly scoped isn't an attribute. It certainly is. But I think in terms of the cost of well, it's just one chapter or just one lesson. The key question is, for what it takes to adopt that, are you appropriately scoped, right? So a game that had, if you will, a chapter's worth of effort, if it takes a week in a classroom to cover a chapter, then you can afford a little bit more onboarding. If you're a platform that covers all the chapters in a text, one after the other, there could be even more friction that you could have, on the front end. So I think that's the way that works out and to balance that. So out of time, happy to answer any more questions in the group session. Thank you very much.
Hello. Well, Brian teed me up really nicely. For those of you I have not met, I think this slide says I've been doing this a long time. Would love a show of hands. How many of you in developing your educational game are looking to go direct to teachers with it? And how many of you are looking to go to the school or the district? Okay, so a couple of each. Let me welcome you to heavily regulated sector. I am going to talk a little bit about the friction, or one element of the friction that Brian was discussing, and hopefully in 6 minutes or less, give you a little walk down the path of what has happened in the past, say, 5 or 6 years in education technology, why it matters to us, and some of the things we need to do about it and start thinking about, especially at the fundamental stage of our development, to reduce a key critical pain point for schools, districts, that is now starting to come down on teachers. Everyone's aware of this privacy thing, right? It's a thing these days. So about 6 years ago, there was an ed tech startup, and I'm gonna sort of walk you down what was a 2.5, maybe 2-year path in maybe a minute. It was a big ed tech startup, and it was middleware. It was an open source platform, and it was going to allow all of you to develop apps and websites that could sit on this open source platform. And the idea being, teachers would no longer have to go into your app and your app and your app and pull out their data and see how their kids were doing. They could just go into this platform, into their black box, and pull out all the data from all of your apps. Great stuff. Questions started coming up. Well, what's going to happen when schools aren't holding on to student data anymore, and it's now with this technology provider, and it's in the cloud, whatever that is, which is a terrible name, by the way, whoever names the cloud. It's just too intangible, and it's created a lot of problems. And so they said, well, what are we going to do, right? What's going to happen? How do we know this data is going to be okay and it's going to be safe there? And it was funded by the Gates Foundation. So stories started flying like, oh, they're going to sell the data to Microsoft. What happened was schools didn't have answers to these questions. They did not have answers. There were town halls spun up. A superintendent in Colorado got fired over their interest in bringing this platform in. They got sued in the state of New York. The lawsuit, the people suing was parent advocates. They did not win the suit, but at that point, New York State said, would you please just go away? At that point, New York State was the last state standing. There were about 9 states that had been contracted at the start. They all started dropping out because questions about privacy could not be answered. New York was the last state standing. They said, please go away. They closed up shop. I believe the code is on GitHub. It's open source. It was a $100 million investment that went down the drains. They sold off the fixtures in the building, kind of thing. That sparked 120 state student data privacy laws and counting. That is not a typo. We have 120 state student data privacy laws that your customers are needing to navigate for themselves, in addition to all their federal legislation and threats of federal funding being taken away, and parent advocates and parents coming to them saying, hey, that app, this is a real complaint I've heard from multiple districts. That app that my child is using in the classroom, my child's in 3rd grade, and that's great that you've got technology in school, but if they do poorly on that app, is that going to prevent them from going to MIT? Because my kid's going to MIT. Now, there's a lot to unpack in that, including like your kid's not going to MIT, but it's this like intangible fear, right? It's this fear of technology. What we have to remember when we're creating products for the classroom is that our stakeholder is the parent and the district. For parents, the classroom does not look what was once familiar, comfortable. We all know what school is, right? We all know our records are in a dusty file cabinet in the basement, disintegrating somewhere. It doesn't look like that anymore. It's unrecognizable. So parents are sending their kids off to school to this place that they don't recognize anymore. That's not comfortable. There's screen time. There's the latest complaint I've heard, and I don't know how to unpack this, is I don't want my child using 5G in the classroom. To which the response was like, no problem. If you want slow internet, like, you are in the right place. You're in K-12 public schools, right? Like, we got ya. We got ya. The fear is real. And not only do we have to be able to understand how to comply with and meet the expectations around these regulations, but also how do we talk about data privacy and security in a way that is easy for schools to understand? Because what's happening, even when we go to the teachers, is schools, districts are starting to get smarter about vetting the classroom technologies. Teachers bring in, not uncommon to see a teacher bring in 500 to 1,000 apps in the classroom. This is making the chief technology officers in the school and the superintendents crazy, because it's all sitting on their network. And districts are responsible for more devices on a network than most companies, right? You've got teacher devices, you've got student devices, sometimes tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of devices sitting on a network. So how is bringing your product onto that network safe and secure? How is it not going to disrupt the functioning? What are you doing to ensure that not only are you protecting the data properly in compliance with all of these regulations and supporting the district compliance there, but how are you able to communicate to the district your compliance in a way that's really knowledge-based and easy for them to understand? Because they are trying to figure that out for all of you. And they don't understand sometimes their own network technology, let alone all of yours. So not uncommon for a district to send out an RFP that's got 50 or 100 questions on privacy and security. So are you prepared to answer those? Because the teacher will bring it in, but when the district is vetting technology, and their biggest pain point, if you ask a school TTO, their biggest pain points with teachers, they'll tell you two things. One is teachers leaving their passwords on Post-it notes on the laptops. It is universal. And the other is teachers bringing technology into the classroom without it having been vetted first. Significant pain point, because the school is responsible. And by the way, these 120 state laws, they're all a little bit different, and the repercussions are sometimes debarment for you, so you can no longer do business in the state. Sometimes they're private right of action. Sometimes it's going to jail. In Louisiana, violating the state student data privacy law means someone can go to jail. So when that law passed, teachers were taking down student artwork in the hallways because they were afraid they were going to go to jail for disclosing student information. So the fear is real, and the misinterpretation and the unknown is quite real. So it's incumbent on you to really get fluent in what's going on. And what happens when districts are vetting these technologies is they're going back to the teacher and saying, do we have something else that we're already using that does the same thing? Because use that. Use that. So understand your competition. What makes you unique? There is very, very little efficacy studies being conducted on technology that's used in schools. Very little. One way to stand out, have some proof that it works. Have some proof that it moves the needle. Right? Prove you're not only aligned with curriculum standards, but using your product is effective. And be able to talk about privacy and security and safety in a way that is based in fact, reflects what you're actually doing, and is easy for a district to understand. Let them not worry about you, let them worry about everyone else. Let them say, oh, you're a trusted partner, right? I can work with you, this makes sense to me. I don't have to worry about you guys, let me worry about all the other technology that's coming in. Any questions? Yes, in the back. No, she doesn't have a question. Yes.
I know they're a COPA safe harbor programs. Are there safe harbor programs for some of the other things you mentioned?
There are not.
Okay.
And remember, the COPPA Safe Harbor program will help you. What the FTC does in looking at a COPPA Safe Harbor is they'll say essentially, because you're a member of a COPPA Safe Harbor, we're going to look favorably on you. You don't escape penalty. And there was one a few years ago caught in New York State, and they, I think they escaped the fine, but not the consent decree. And they, and then the safe harbor was penalized because they weren't doing their job properly. But a lot of these laws, some of them apply to the district, not to you directly, but there are things that you must do when working in a school to align with them. Other questions? I saw a few hands up. Yes.
Do districts look more favorably on game developers or game information when they delete student information, or is that something that they would prefer student information to be maintained for 5 years or whatever in the future?
They do not want student information to be maintained for 5 years or however long in the future. The rule is, and the law is, when your contract expires, you actually must delete the personal information. And there are some variations on that, like you can take 30 days, 45 days, depending on the state. California is when contract terminates, you must delete the data. There are ways that we work around that. But the rule is essentially the data belongs to the district, you have to return it and then get rid of it. I am out of time, but we've got someone next up.
Hi, everybody. So I'm here to talk a little bit about some research that we did over the course of a few months last year around driving inclusivity and belonging in gaming. So I'm here from Google, and specifically from Google Play, to talk to you first about what we're doing with Change the Game. So this is an initiative that hopefully at least a few of you know about, but after this all of you will know about, where we are on a mission to make mobile gaming truly for everyone. So I'm sure you all know Google Play. It is the gaming destination within the Android ecosystem. And Change the Game is really about making gaming a place that women feel welcome in and feel included in, both as players of games, as makers of games, as influencers, etc. And part of the work that we're doing is around research to really understand the needs of females in the gaming community, and to help hopefully all of you build for an inclusive gaming experience, since if you don't, you are missing half of your target audience, and it's 2019. So something that I think is really interesting around this research is, and I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, we were very intentionally talking to women who gamed, young women who gamed, primarily 18 to 35. We also spoke to some influencers in this space. We did a pretty robust quantitative survey in the US, UK, and Japan, and we talked to about 60 gamers in the US, UK, and Japan. Very few of them identify as gamers. That's what I think is like the most interesting thing about all of this. And I'm seeing some head nodding, and I think there's something about the noun gamer and the badging of gamer that makes a lot of women and female identifying people uncomfortable. It can feel old-fashioned, it can feel exclusive and exclusionary, and there's some interesting sort of rejection of that trope of gamer and what gamer means, while still celebrating all that we want gamer to mean as people who make and promote games. So I think there's an interesting thing that is overarching to all of this work around how do you meet women where they are and let them be gamers without calling them gamer and without putting them into this box of feeling like they need to play a certain way, talk a certain way, look a certain way, act a certain way, when really they're enjoying and experiencing all of the things that we think of as badging somebody as a gamer. So the first opportunity that we learned from this research is these women are multimodal players, and you can help them play their way. I think one of the biggest learnings from this work is that women don't play like one specific way at one specific time. The sort of stereotype of like coming home at the end of the day and like turning on your console and playing for a few hours isn't really aligned with the fluid ways that women like to experience games in different contexts, on their way to work or school, sort of to relax, to unwind, to socialize with friends. There's a real flexibility and fluidity to how they play, and it's not just about switching game titles, it's often about that sort of multimodal experience within a single game. So I think the more developers can think about different kinds of experiences people can have within a single game, the more women will feel like that game is designed for them. So here, the first opportunity, designed for diverse gaming motivations. So the first point here design for their games catalog. Think how your title fuels different functional and emotional needs to play. The women that we spoke to, both in the quant and qual side of this, had very different reasons for choosing each game and actually were pretty readily able to articulate how they were feeling, why they turned to that game, or if it was about sort of a different experience within a game, they might say, oh, you know, right now I'm in this game because I want to build and finesse a character. Next, I'm going to go deeper in this game and try to beat this level. They would have very sort of different conscious intentions within even a single title. Celebrate all gaming styles and motivations. I think because there has been sort of a history of excluding women from gaming spaces, they're very sensitive to being told that there's like a right way to play or a right time to play. I think that kind of judgment and frankly, on the kinder side, assumptiveness that people sometimes make in creating a game is something women are sensitive to. And finally, and I mentioned this, champion multiple styles of play in one game. So women were finding like whole universes within games that I think had been designed a little bit more narrowly. They were able to almost like create these micro gaming experiences within a single title in this really fascinating way. So a game could be both social and independent. A game could be both creative and direct. A game could both be a source of release and relaxation and also a way to sort of grow and learn. And we found that really interesting. The next opportunity is women want meaningful storytelling and they want content that better reflects the world. Another thing that we heard throughout this work is women are seeing other kinds of entertainment and education better reflect them, and gaming is lagging behind. So we're seeing film, we're seeing television, we're seeing other environments and sources of entertainment and learning really embrace, and we're talking about women here, but really embrace all different kinds of diversity in this really beautiful way. And gaming can feel a little bit stuck in the past. And I think, especially as we consider gaming in a learning environment when you're in schools, separately, I've also been doing some Gen Z research. Like, these guys are with it. They expect diversity, they expect representation, they expect to be able to see themselves and see the people around them, and they have a remarkable amount of empathy. When we were talking to this very young woman, for example, she was saying that she felt like there was a lot of ageism in gaming, and she was frustrated that there weren't older characters, and she was frustrated that older streamers weren't getting audiences. So it's not just about showing them women, and it's certainly not about tokenism because they will notice immediately. It's really about making sure that all the different kinds of people that they see in the world around them are represented, and frankly that gaming looks the way that movies and TV are starting to look, which is great. So support diverse gaming content and personalities. The first one is showing them authenticity. Women that we spoke to were really drawn to games that reflected their experience and reflected the real world that they lived in. They enjoyed when characters had sort of quirks and flaws and vulnerabilities that, again, reflected the reality around them. I think that sort of veneer of perfection and that kind of old-fashioned arcade vibe, not with all women, but with many of the women we spoke to, wasn't resonating in quite the same way as some of the more authentic content. Celebrating female gamers of all levels is another really important one. People that they can relate to and the extent to which we can help amplify streamers and players who aren't just professionals and who aren't just polished, and frankly, in the case of women, just are women. Like, this is just such an underrepresented population in the streaming space. There was a lot of talk about not wanting all characters and all streamers to be kind of sexy or sexualized and wanting gaming to feel like professional and cool and awesome. So I think also considering the voices and the advocates we put behind our titles and the people we encourage to play our games and support our games matters. And finally, customization options that excite them really matter. We talk to so many women who like love building characters. One thing I will say, this is a point where globally we saw some real differences. In the US and UK, people were like, I want like a skin color slider, and I want to be able to put like the freckle on my nose, and I want to have the exact texture of my hair, and I don't want like 3 options. I want like 11 options or 100 options, like incredible nuance where they like want to see themselves exactly. In Japan, it's much more of like a wanting to create your fantasy. So if you're designing for that audience, people really wanted that creativity and customization, but it was more of, let me imagine who I could be or what I could embody. And like, if I want to be like a pink warlock, please let me be a pink warlock. Whereas in the US, they were like, if this does not look like me in the mirror, I will probably go play another game. So I thought that was a really interesting cultural difference. The final opportunity here, rules and customs of the gaming community don't necessarily appeal to them. I think this is an area where women and female identifying people feel really excluded, again, from that idea of gamer and sort of the stereotype. I don't want to perpetuate this stereotype, but so many times people said, you know, I'm not the guy in my parents' basement. I think that trope, even though we've moved so far beyond it, is like ingrained in their minds. And if they are talking to people who are not part of their gaming community, that's the response they're getting from their friends and family. Like, oh, like, Jeanette, you don't seem like a gamer to me because you're like a 21-year-old college student and you're majoring in biochem and like you have like your hair in like a nice perm. It's just this stereotype that they haven't moved beyond, and their friends and family are pushing against them for it too. So cultivate diverse and tolerant gaming communities. First of all, this idea of confidence in closed groups came up a lot. So a lot of women are interacting with their friends in gaming communities, but there is, to state the obvious, so much trolling and bullying that happens that they are seeking out safe spaces, and they are often protecting themselves from even being identified as female in spaces where they don't know that they can trust everyone around them. Something that I think is interesting is sort of the double-edged sword of anonymity in some games, where they would say, you know, even if I'm on audio, people don't immediately know that I'm female, but as soon as they know that I'm female, it's a weakness, and people want to make that assumption because they want to have something they can kind of poke at you for, so they're looking for those safe spaces. Next is giving women places where they can learn to play games. A lot of women said that when they first start playing a new title, they're very sensitive to the fact that people don't like give them room to grow and learn and figure out the world they're in. So the more games can give them space to learn and safe training ground, that was responding well. And finally, just the idea of connecting them with the gaming community. A lot of women said that the gaming community felt incredibly inclusive when it was in person, and much less inclusive when they were actually in the gaming environment in their own home or in another space. So the more you can connect those IRL experiences, the more that will help them. And I actually went a little bit over already, but if there's like one quick question, I can take it. If not, we can do it in the group. Yes?
Is your study available for us?
Yes, it is very available, and I would love for you all to download this white paper. It is apparently not linked here, which is a miss. So if you look up Google Play Change the Game, the white paper is downloadable on our site, and it has lots of great stats, and I would very much love for all of you to read it and share it. Thank you for asking. And Design for Women. Like games. Thanks.
So despite hitting our time goals, I think now we've got 30 seconds for group chat. So actually it says 3 minutes over here, so I could be wrong. Why don't we have all the speakers come up here? And you know what? I think what I'm going to do is just say, see all these amazing, lovely people? If you have questions, remember their faces, and you can come up. Actually, we're probably going to get booted from the room pretty quick, so maybe we can adjourn out into the hall, and you can ask them questions there. Please help me give them a round of applause.